Good day, everyone. I am Kara Marielty Dumuluan, and I am from Quibo Group, and we are going to report the miscellaneous topics. What is a service concession arrangement? A service concession arrangement is an arrangement whereby a government or other public sector body, which is the grantor, contracts with the private entity, which is the operator, to develop, upgrade, operate, and maintain the grantor's infrastructure assets such as roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, energy distribution networks, prisons, or hospitals. There are examples of concession arrangements under Republic Act Number 7718. It is an act amending certain sections of Republic Act Number 6965 entitled An Act Authorizing the Financing, Construction, Operation, and Maintenance of Infrastructure Projects by the private sectors and for other purposes. The first example is the Build, Operate, Transfer, or the BOT. It is a contractual arrangement where a private entity finances, constructs, and operates an infrastructure facility for fixed term not exceeding 50 years. At the end of this period, the facility is transferred back to the government agency or local government unit or LGU. Example of it is the Mindanao First Geothermal Plant in Kidapawan City. Second example is the Build, Transfer, and Operate or the BTO. In this arrangement, the private entity finances and constructs the infrastructure facility and then transfers ownership to the government agency or LGU. The private entity then operates and maintains the facility for a predetermined period, collecting revenue from users. Example of it is the Southern Tagalog Arterial Road in Southern Tagalog. Third example is the Rehabilitate, Operate, and Transfer or ROT. This arrangement involves a private entity rehabilitating an existing infrastructure facility, operating it for a specified period, and then transferring it back to the government. Fourth is the Develop, Operate, Transfer or the DOT. This arrangement allows the private entity to develop land adjacent to a new infrastructure project, leveraging the benefits of the investment to generate additional revenue. Example of it is the Light Rail Transit or LRT Line Number 3 in Metro Manila. Fifth is the Contract, Add, and Operate or CAO. In this arrangement, the private entity adds to an existing infrastructure facility that it leases from the government. The private entity operates the expanded facility for a predetermined period. Ownership of the added facility may or may not be transferred to the government. Example of it is the MWSS privatization in Metro Manila. So, the recognition of the service concession asset is that the grantor recognizes a service concession asset if it controls the services provided with the asset, including who receives them and pricing, and retains significant residual interest at the end of the arrangement. Full control over pricing isn't necessary as long as it is regulated and any excess profits are returned to the grantor. If both conditions are met, the operator is only managing the asset on the grantor's behalf. The initial measurement of service concession asset. A service concession asset is initially measured at fair value if the asset is provided by the operator in accordance with the recognition criteria in A and B in the previous slide. It is initially measured also at cost in accordance with the measurement principles for PPE or intangible assets as appropriate. If the asset is reclassified from the existing assets of the grantor. For example, an existing asset is transferred to the operator for refurbishing. Subsequent measurement of service concession asset. It is subsequently measured as service concession tangible asset and service concession intangible asset.
So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Mai Huncolada, and I will be discussing in front of you the recognition and measurement of liability under miscellaneous topic. So, recognition and measurement of liability. In a service concession arrangement where a government, the grantor, receives a service concession asset like road or utility, it also takes on a liability that equals the value of the asset. However, the liability adjusts depending on whether cash was exchanged between the grantor and the private operator. Then, no liability for reclassifying existing assets. But first, let's discuss the reclassify. What is reclassify? So, reclassify means changing the classification or category of an asset without altering its ownership. So, sa Bisaya pa, ang reclassify ko no is kanang gi-usabra, like pagbag-o sa posisyon or pagbag-o sa category. So, back to the topic. No liability for reclassifying an existing asset if the government simply reclassifies an existing asset as a service concession asset like road or hospital without receiving additional value from the operator, then no liability is recognized. So, for example, a government entity reclassifies an existing public parking facility as a service concession asset, granting a private company the rights to manage and operate it. So, no liability is recognized tungod kay ang asset's ownership hasn't changed. Then, the operator assumes the operational responsibility. Then, third, no additional obligation arises for the grantor. However, if the operator provides additional consideration like upfront payment, the grantor may recognize a liability to extent of that consideration. So, next is financial liability model. So, financial liability model. The government owes money to a private company when it agrees to pay for a service concession asset like road or hospital. And also, payments are divided into reducing the debt interest and fees for services, and if the parts of the payment aren't clear, then the government makes an estimation. So, ang government, if ang parts sa payment kay dili pa klaro, like dili pa nila ma-picture out bitaw kung unsay may tabo, then or pilay kantidad nga magasto or ma-cost ana nga butanga, then ang government na ang mag-estimate kibali nga unsay possible nga amount or unsay possible nga pwede nila possible amount nga sila mabayad. So, next is grants of rights to the operator model. So, instead of paying cash, the government can let the operator earn money by allowing them to collect fees from users like toll fees on a highway. So, sa kanipa nga example is, instead of sa grants of rights to the operator model, so instead of paying cash, the government can let the operator earn money. So, pwede atagan og way sa or pwede atagan og right sa government nga or tagan i-allow sila nga mag-collect sa fees like mauna ibayad sa ilaha. So, instead of paying cash, the government can let the operator earn money by allowing them to collect fees users like toll fees on a highway, giving them access to another revenue generating asset. So, di ba, kung buhaton ni sa government, murag magtuyok-tuyok ang ilahang revenue. Kay asset ba gyapon siya. So, like a private parking lot next to the public facility. So in this way, the private company earns from these sources while the rest of the hospital or facility is still used by the public. So next is dividing the arrangement. So if the operator is compensated partly by cash payment and partly by a grant of rights like collecting user fees, the grantor must divide the total liability between these two elements and account for them separately. So, if ang operator is compensated like by gitunga siya into cash payment and grants of rights, so siyempre i-account po siya separately. Kay laylay man sila liability, laylay sila liability. So then the amount initially recognized as the total liability is equal to the value of the service concession asset. However, this amount will be adjusted if any other consideration such as cash is received from or paid by the operator or to the operator. So next is impairment and recognition. So lastly, impairment and recognition. So, if the asset loses value or is no longer in use, standard procedures for impairment and recognition as for property, plant, and equipment or the PPE or intangible asset are applied. So, just like the previous group, ilang discuss is about PPE. Then, based on the book, PPE are subsequently measured using the cost model. So, sa giingon pa pud sa ako adani is sa akong gi-report is same ra daw sila standard procedure, so same ra pod. So PPE or intangible asset can be measured using the cost model. So just like also PPE, intangible asset is impaired if its carrying amount exceeds its recoverable service amount or recoverable amount. Then PPE is recognized when it's disposed or when no future economic benefits. So same ra gyapon siya. So kung unsa ang sa PPE, mo ra gyapon ang impairment and recognition sa recognition and measurement of liability. So that's all. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Prince Algensi Rebollos and I'm here in front of you to tackle about the joint venture. So what is joint venture? Joint venture is a binding arrangement whereby two or more parties are committed to undertake an activity that is subject to joint control. So what is joint venture? So joint venture is basically a temporary business association within a two or more parties, and the goal is to make profit. So without forming any partnership or corporation. So joint venture is basically saying like, let's have a deal. You will do this set of activities right there, and also I will do this set of activities right here in order for us to gain profit and achieve the goal that we agree. So wala na siya kanang kuti pa lang alain. Di na mo kailangan og conference meeting, dili na mo mag negotiation. Simple lang nga email siya sa agreement, mag-agree mo duha, then buhat na din mo sa inyong goal para makuha to ninyo. So mag-end ra pud na siya nga agreement if makuha nila ilang goal or dili effective ang ilahang agreement or siya ma-bankrupt. Mag-end ng agreement sa joint venture. So the next one is Joint control. So what is joint control? Is the agreed sharing of control over an activity by a binding arrangement. So ang example ani is for example si entity A ug entity C nagsabot sila nga mag-combine sila sa ilahang silang expertise ug sa resources. So nagsabot sila nga 50% imuha, 50% ako. So kanang 50% muna siya ang joint control. So for example, 50% ka entity A, 50% ka entity B. So 50% ang ilahang joint control. So yeah, muna. So let's go ahead and proceed to the next one. So 3 forms of joint venture under GAMS for NGAs. First one is jointly controlled operation, second is jointly controlled assets, and then the third one is jointly controlled entities. So for the first one, jointly controlled operation. So venturer is a party to a joint venture and has joint control over that joint venture. So for example, si entity A ug si entity B nakasinabot sila magbuhat og joint venture. So it's entity A kay siya kay venturer siya, si entity B kay venturer po siya. So basically ang venturer kay kanang party sa isa ka joint venture. So for jointly controlled operation, under jointly controlled operation, the joint venturer recognizes its own costs, assets and liabilities, but recognize its share in the sale revenue of the joint venture. For both venturers, no adjustments or other consolidation procedures are necessary when each prepares its financial statements. So, nako example ani. So, for example, si entity A ug si entity C nakasinabot sila nga mag-combine sila sa ilang resources ug expertise to gain to make a particular product para mag-release sila sa market. So ang different nga ways ana kapag-construct sa product is anang i-incur sa usa ka sa venturer. So for example, kanang naka-expense si entity A og 15 million. So record niya sa yung N 15 million. So si entity B naka-expense siya og 20 million. So iyang i-expense iyang record sa iyang kagalingon kay 20 million. Pero if makasale si entity A og 20 million, mag-split sila. 10 million i-record ni entity A, 10 million i-record ni entity B. Same sad sa kung unsay ma-profit ni entity B. If naka-profit siya og maybe 30 million, 15 million ra yung record sa iyang kagalingon and 15 million ka entity A. So basically kuan lang siya kanang ug unsay expenses nila ilaha to, pero ug na sila profit magtunga sila. So mo na siya ang jointly controlled operation. So the next one would be jointly controlled assets. So let me just read the definition right here. Under jointly controlled asset, the joint venture recognizes its share in the joint venture's assets, liabilities. Income and expenses include them line by line to its own assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. For both venturers, no other adjustments are necessary when each prepares its financial statements because each venturer's financial statements already reflect the economic reality of the arrangement. So yeah, para masabtan na to kayo. So for example, si entity A na oil company, sa entity B kay naapoy oil company. So nag-agreed sila duha maghimo sila oil pipeline para pag-transport sa ilahang oil. So of course namo gina siya acquisition cost o expenses. So katong acquisition cost o expenses magtunga sila. So for example, acquisition cost kay 30 million. So i-record niya sa yang N ni entity A 15 million, then kay entity B 15 million. So total kay 30 million. Sa na expenses pod kay maybe 10 million. So i-record ni entity A 5 million, then entity B 5 million. Pero kung unsay ma-profit nila aton nila sa ilang kagalingon, for example, si entity A naka-profit siya og 30 million. So iyang i-record siyang kagalingon 30 million. Si entity B naka-record og 50 million. Naka-profit. Iyang i-record siyang kagalingon 50 million. So basically magtunga sila sa expenses pero dili sila magtunga sa sales. Opposite siya sa jointly controlled operation, di ba? Kaya ang jointly controlled operation kay Di sila magtunga sa expenses pero magtunga sila sa profit. Pero sa jointly controlled assets kay magtunga sila sa expenses and acquisition pero di sila magtunga sa profit. Mo na siya difference niya. So, and the last one will be the jointly controlled entities. So, jointly controlled entities, under jointly controlled entities, the joint venture recognizes its interest in the joint venture, a separate entity under the investment in joint venture account, which is accounted for using the equity method. So, ako example ani is, for example, yapon si entity A ug si entity B. Nag-agreed sila nga mag-share og resources ug expertise para magbuhat og another entity. For example, we'll name the entity C. So entity A ug entity B naghimo sila og bagong entity, which is si entity C. So ang example lang ang para masabtan nato, og unsay expenses ni entity C, i-record niya sa iyang kaugalingon na siya different nga record sa entity C. So if makakuan siya, maka-incur siya expenses or investment, maka investment na 10 million, i-record ni entity C sa iyang kaugalingon 10 million. Then sa kang entity A ug entity B, 5 million sila tunga. Then if maka-profit si entity C og butang nato 30 million, i-record ni entity C 30 million. Dayon kang entity A kay 15 million, kay entity B kay 15 million. So basically tunga sila tanan sa unsay ma-earn ni entity C. Ug unsa may expenses tunga sila, ug unsay ilang dividends, ug nay dividends magtunga gyapon sila. Then si ug nay profit tunga sila. So basically tunga sila, unlike before sa jointly controlled asset o operation kay magtunga sa kuan lang sila, sa jointly controlled operation kay magtunga lang sila sa profit. Then sa jointly controlled asset kay sa expenses o acquisition. Diri sa jointly controlled entities magtunga sila tanan og unsay ma-expense o ma-acquire sa entity C nga sa entity C, which is ilang gihimo nga bag-ong entity. So let's proceed. For jointly controlled entities, it is under equity method. So basically, it is the accounting technique used to record the profit earned to the investor to the another company. Isa lang siya ka accounting technique na ginagamit bitaw para ma-record ang na-earn sa isa ka investor sa usa ka company. So muna siyang equity method. Then the last one would be the investment in associates. Investment in associates, if an investor lacks joint control but a significant influence, the investment is categorized as investment in associates, also using the equity method. So for ang example na ani, so ang one na isa ka investor nga na-invest siya sa isa ka entity, dayon na siya significant influence. So normally magkuan lang ni siya pag imuhang nakuha nga shares is 20% to 50% na nakay significant impact sa usa ka company. So that's all for the joint venture. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my topic is all about the effects of changes in foreign exchange rate. Let me explain the meaning of the effects of changes in foreign exchange rate. Changes in foreign exchange rate impacts businesses and individuals involved in international trade and investment. A stronger local currency makes import cheaper and export more expensive, while a weaker local currency makes import more expensive and export cheaper. This affects businesses' profitability, consumer prices, and investment decisions. With initial measurement. Initial measurement of foreign currency transaction is initially measured by translating the foreign currency amount into the functional currency using the spot exchange rate. Meaning, when a foreign currency transaction is first recorded, it must be converted into the functional currency using the spot exchange rate at the time of the transaction. The meaning of a spot exchange rate is the current rate at which one currency can be exchanged for another in the foreign exchange market. It reflects the price at which immediate transaction or on the spot are settled. Typically, within 2 business days, this rate fluctuates constantly due to supply and demand forces in the market. Go to the second slide. Subsequent measurement. A subsequent measurement of foreign currency transaction is initially measured by translating the foreign currency amount into the functional currency using the spot exchange rate, meaning after the initial recording, the foreign currency amount are remeasured at different exchange rate depending on the type of the items. Example is letter A, monetary items translated into closing rate. Letter B, non-monetary items measured at historical cost translated using exchange rate at the date of transaction. Letter C is non-monetary item measured at fair value translated using exchange rate at the fair value measurement date. Slide 3, exchange difference. Exchange difference arising from translation of letter A monetary items are recognized in surplus or deficit in the period in, in which they are arise. Meaning, monetary items refer to assets and liabilities that are fixed in terms of money and whose value does not change with inflation or deflation. Example includes cash accounts payable and accounts payable. In the context of exchange difference, monetary items are particularly significant because their value can fluctuate based on change in exchange rate. When a company has a monetary items denominated in foreign currency, any charge in a spot exchange rate between the functional currency and the foreign currency can result in an exchange gain or loss. Is non-monetary items. If the gain or loss is recognized in equity, the exchange component of the gain or loss is also recognized in equity. If the gain or loss is recognized in surplus or deficit, the exchange component is also recognized in surplus or deficit. Meaning, if the non-monetary items are assets and liabilities that not have a fixed cash value and whose value can change due to factors like market condition, inflation, or depreciation. Examples include inventory, property, plants, equipment, and intangible assets. In the context of exchange differences, non-monetary items are typically not affected by changes in exchange rate. When they are initially recognized, however, there are some important considerations. The difference resulting from translating a given number of units of one currency into another currency at different exchange rate. In simple terms, exchange differences result from translating foreign currency into the functional currency at different rates, which can lead to gain or losses depending on the direction of exchange rate movement. For illustration example, to make this clearer, here's an example. On December 15, the Philippine government obtained a $51 million loan from the World Bank. The exchange rate at the December was 15 pesos to $1. By December 31, the exchange rate increased to 50 pesos to $1, and by January 14, it decreased to 49 pesos to 1 pesos. On December 31, government experienced a loss due to the peso weakening, causing the loan to increase in peso value from 50 million pesos to 52 million pesos, resulting in 2 million losses. However, on January 14, as the peso strengthened, the loan value decreased to 49 million pesos, giving a 3 million gain. These examples show how exchange rate can directly impact financial obligation. Translation of financial statement. Lastly, let's cover the translation of financial statements. An entity is required to present its financial statement using its functional currency. However, it can relate its financial statement to any presentation currency whenever needed. Like example here, letter A, asset and liabilities, including cooperative, translated using closing rate at the date of statement of financial position. Letter B is revenue and expenses, including cooperatives, translated using exchange rate at the date of the transaction. All resulting differences are recognized as separate components. All resulting differences are recorded as the separate components of equity to keep the financial statement consistent and transparent.